Good morning, everybody. Hopefully everyone's doing well today. Missing a few people, that's okay. We'll get going without them. If we can start with some green check marks so I know you're with me, everything's working, and then we'll get started. Today I wanted to start with any questions you might have had from Learning Guide from Unit 2. So if there was anything that came up that was tricky, unsure of, didn't understand, anything like that, I would be happy to go through that. As well, I wanted to mention that instead of doing the pages 18 to 23 in the Learning Guide, we're going to do the biography of a nutrient instead. Maybe I'll jump into the course here and show you what I mean there. So for Unit 2 here, we have everything that we've gone through. And you'll notice up at the top, I wrote here, do not do pages 18 to 23, complete the Unit 2 assignment. So the Unit 2 assignment's down here, and that was the biography of a nutrient, sort of tracking the nutrient through its cycle. So remember to do that instead. When you do it, you can just put it in the back of your Learning Guide. So I just added this morning. You can see down here, Unit 2, Learning Guide Dropbox / biography of a nutrient assignment. So you can just submit them together. You don't have to submit them separately. I'll just mark them both at the end, and then I'll assign a mark for the nutrient, and then I'll assign a mark for your Dropbox or your Learning Guide in the Dropbox there too. Yeah, we can definitely look at the nutrient cycles again. Why don't we do that right now? Just jump in here. Any cycle that you were unsure of in particular? Let's see if I can find them. Maybe let's just look at the nitrogen one to start with here, because it is the trickiest. Jumbo size that. All right, so remember there's the 3 cycles we have to deal with, and we have all of these things that are given to us in our data booklets, so we don't have to really memorize anything along the way. So we have nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus. Now phosphorus is kind of the easier of the 3. Nitrogen's is the more challenging one, and then carbon's kind of in the middle. So the basic idea here is that these nutrients exist in our environment, in the atmosphere or in rocks, and they just kind of cycle around. They start somewhere. You can start wherever you want. You can start in an animal. You can start in a plant. You can start in the ground. You can start wherever you want. And you can follow the nitrogen from there. So if you had like one atom of nitrogen, you could follow it completely through the environment wherever it started and ended. So looking at the nitrogen cycle here, if you were to start, let's say in the atmosphere, right up at the top here, it says atmosphere, you're N2, so you're 2 nitrogens bonded together, which is fine. And then what happens? Well, there's a couple things that can happen. You can either take the right arrow here, and you can get essentially fixed by lightning, so we call it nitrogen fixation, or you can take the blue arrow and go down as NH4 into the soil, get used by plants, or you can continue down and then get changed into NH4, NO2, and then NO3. And then from there, you can follow either the green arrow up, or you can follow the red, or pinkish, I guess I should say, arrow up. So just being able to follow the arrows, follow the paths is kind of the key here. Maybe I'll jump over to the phosphorus cycle so we can kind of compare it. So phosphorus, again, a little bit simpler of a cycle, less stuff going on. Remember, phosphorus isn't contained in the atmosphere. It's only contained as kind of like I guess a solid form. It's either dissolved in water or a solid. So it's in the water, or it's in an animal or a plant. It's not in the atmosphere, not breathing in phosphorus. So you could start again anywhere. You could start up here in the top right corner where it says weathering. So your phosphorus in a rock, you get weathered, you run down into the ocean, you get absorbed by a plant, and then you get eaten by a fish, and then the eagle eats you, and then you get this arrow. So you're just following the arrows around. Once the eagle dies, it gets broken back down into the soil, and then you can get this kind of sedimentation stuff behind me happening where that phosphorus gets trapped until it can get weathered by another process. So that's kind of the cycles. I'll jump back to the carbon cycle. If I can find the carbon cycle. There it is. Carbon cycle, the big two are cellular respiration and photosynthesis. That's kind of the interaction that our living things use. So carbon can be trapped in rock, or it can be trapped in oil and gas, and it gets released into the atmosphere. So once we release that carbon into the atmosphere, it's there. Now plants can take it in, and then animals eat the plants, we eat the plants, and then we die, and then decomposers break our carbon back down, and we enter the soil again, and you just get this continuous cycle. So you can, again, just try to follow the arrows. There's lots of sort of natural exchanges going on with carbon. So releasing some carbon into the atmosphere, it's taking some carbon in the oceans and things like that. So that's carbon cycle in a nutshell. There you go. I won't spend too much more time on that because we do have lots to get through today. So we're gonna jump into Unit 3. Nobody put in any questions about the learning guide for Unit 2, so we'll just go with this. So how changes occur naturally in ecosystems. We're gonna talk a little bit about some natural processes today, and then we might have a little break, and then maybe a few unnatural processes, or, oh sorry Alex, I missed that. Bottom half of page 7. My chat got scrolled up a bit. Page 6, page 7. The carbon cycle. Are we looking at that, Alex? That was from the PowerPoint that I went through last day. Carbon atoms are fundamental unit in cells of living things. Carbon is an essential part of chemical process of sustaining life. Carbon can be stored in many different locations. In terrestrial, CO2 in the atmosphere. Carbon cycle on the bottom half of general information. So that corresponds to the video we did 2 days ago. So that's where all that information comes from. Or you can go through the carbon cycle, a little green icon in the course. So if you're still having issues with that, finding that information, I could probably help you out, but I don't think it's too hard to find. You just have to find. If you read the textbook pages online, you should be able to find the answers. Thanks, Anna. Yeah, it's a matter of doing the textbook or even the stuff I went through when I did the carbon cycle. So you just got to look for it. It's there. All right. So naturally occurring changes in ecosystems. So every organism has its own unique traits, I guess that's what it's saying. And sometimes organisms will have different advantages within their ecosystem. They fill different niche because of how their body works or sort of things that they have on their body. We're going to talk a little bit about natural selection. So natural selection is a really important idea in biology, and it's really kind of misunderstood, I guess is the best way to describe it. Natural selection is a process where individuals with advantages are better able to reproduce and then pass their traits on. That's kind of the basic example or definition of natural selection. So the idea here is that if you have something that allows you to survive, you're going to pass your genetic information on. You're going to find a mate, or you're going to reproduce more readily. If you have something that some sort of trait that would not allow you to survive as well, well, you're probably not going to reproduce and pass that trait on. There's a chance you may still reproduce, but there's a chance that you're going to die and that sort of trait will die with you. So the idea behind natural selection is it isn't an immediate process. It's not like you just say, oh, you know, I need to climb a tree, I wish I was taller, and boom, you're taller. No, that's not how natural selection works. Natural selection works over generations. So when we talk about, you know, having offspring, having children, and your children having children, each time you reproduce, that's another generation. So it happens over many generations. And for animals or plants, we can talk about generations being really short. So if you're like a fruit fly, you only live for 3 or 4 days. You have a very short lifespan. So we can talk about, you know, if you looked at a month, you're looking at 10 generations of fruit flies in a month. That's really fast. If you're looking at humans, average humans probably has a lifespan around 60 to 80 years. So, you know, one generation of human is 80 years. If I'm going to pass on traits to my offspring, you know, when am I doing that? Well, probably around 30 years or 20 to 30 years old sort of thing. So generations of humans are around 20 years, lifespan a little bit longer. So that's the idea. We can talk about things like salmon. If you had a salmon with a really small tail, you end up with that salmon probably not being able to swim as far upstream, maybe not finding a suitable habitat to lay its eggs or to fertilize eggs, and it would die. So it wouldn't pass on its genetic information, where if the salmon had a regular sized tail, it would be able to swim and find that nice gravel bed sort of thing. So it's a really basic example. Let's look at a couple more. This is kind of, don't want to say a famous example, but it just kind of sums things up really well. So basic idea with natural selection is there's some sort of genetic mutation that occurs. And when we think like, oh no, genetic mutations, we're not talking about the Hulk, we're not talking about Spider-Man, we're talking about things that make you unique, your eye color. That's genetic mutations. Some people have green eyes, blue eyes. Those are all just mutations in your genes. Now, it's kind of hard to argue that, you know, having blue eyes is going to make you survive longer. No, probably not. But if you think about like going back a long period of time, if you had to hunt for your food, if you were, you know, really skinny, really small muscle mass, you couldn't chase your food, well, you probably wouldn't provide food for yourself and you would die. But if you were big and strong and could chase and hunt all day, well, now that trait gets passed on because you're able to hunt. The idea here in this picture beside me is you'd have different types of moth. So if you're this red bird and you're flying around and you eat moths, that's what you eat. If you are kind of flying by a tree and you can see the white tree here on the left side, if you're a white moth on a white tree, well, you kind of blend in. So you're probably not going to get eaten. This guy's probably not going to get eaten. And then all of a sudden you have this yellow moth that kind of stands out. So the bird flying by the tree sees that yellow moth because there's a real sharp contrast in its color. It eats the yellow moth. So if all those yellow moths are getting eaten, that yellow gene, that yellow mutation in that moth is going to kind of get wiped out of the gene pool because it's no longer an advantage. But the white trait will live on because those white moths blend in. And you can have the same thing on a kind of a darker tree. You have these yellowish moths kind of blend in and the white moth stands out. So what happens in this ecosystem? Well, the white moth gets killed because, you know, all the trees are a different color. So there you go. It kind of is a really basic example of natural selection. How come there are no naturally occurring blue or green haired people? I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure, Alex. There's just, there's no genetic mutation for green hair yet, I suppose. Or it's just maybe not possible. This little cartoon here kind of highlights one of the important aspects of natural selection. So the beaver, instead of having to chew through the tree, has a chainsaw hand and can just, you know, cut the tree down, which really seems like a great idea. But that's not how natural selection works. Natural selection does not grant an organism what they need. So it doesn't give a beaver a chainsaw hand. That's not how it works. You're not an organism. You think, wow, it'd be great if I had, longer legs so I could run faster to, run around. Well, you don't just grow longer legs. No, you have some sort of genetic mutation where somebody along the way has longer legs, and then they have offspring, and then that gene gets passed down from generation to generation. So that's the kind of ideas behind natural selection. I guess I'll go back. There's kind of two main points. There's some sort of genetic mutation that gets passed down from generation to generation. So it's a multi-generational thing. There has to be some sort of mutation. It doesn't just happen like I grow a chainsaw hand. Those are the important ideas there. So a really cool example of this is the Galapagos Islands. And these islands are off the coast of South America. You can see on the little map here. They're about 600 miles off the coast of South America, which is a long, long ways. So there is a lot of isolation here. These islands have been cut off from human influence for thousands of years, and they've been cut off from sort of any other animal's influence for thousands of years, with the exception of birds that are kind of flying out there. They have really sort of lots of rich varieties of life and things like that on it. And there was a guy called Charles Darwin who came up with the theory of natural selection. He visited these islands and he saw lots of evidence of this sort of these birds and all sorts of iguanas and turtles and all these things that lived in isolation for so long. And he came up with this theory by visiting these islands. Isn't that like a bit how dog breeders pick certain dogs that can look nicest and have best temperament? They breed those ones. Yeah, that is exactly what's going on here, Abby. Except, like you mentioned, it's not natural. So the idea is if you want to breed a dog that maybe is really strong and can carry lots of things, maybe you find, two breeds, like some big dog, like I don't know, what's a big dog? Burmese mountain dog. They're pretty big. And then you find some other dog that has some other desirable trait, and then you can breed them, and then the offspring should have kind of a mix of both of those traits. So there you go. But we're talking about this happening in nature over many generations. So that's the idea here. So on the Galapagos Islands, off the coast of South America, one of the examples that Darwin used to come up with this theory of natural selection is there's these birds, and they're called finches. And we have finches around here, but they have a special type of finches on the Galapagos Islands. And basically, the idea was that when the finches first moved to the islands, they flew there, landed on the islands, thought, hey, this is a nice place to call home, so they started to live there. And then, if you can imagine being a finch, you reproduce and you have babies, and then say you eat seeds. Now, all of these finches have reproduced and populated this island, and they've all eaten the seeds. So now there's not enough food for all of these. So, some finches start to die off maybe, or maybe they find a different food source. And that was kind of the idea behind the finches on the Galapagos Islands. The term we use to describe it's called adaptive radiation. So these two finches are the same bird essentially, but you'll notice that their beaks are very different. The one on the top here has this really wide beak, and the one on the bottom has a really pointed beak. So this is an example of an adaptation that happened to these animals based on their environment. So food sources became scarce, and again, it wasn't like one of the birds said, I need a bigger beak to eat seeds, and boom, he has a big beak to eat seeds. No, over many generations, the bigger beak allowed that bird to eat that food source, and that sort of gene or that trait survived because it got passed off from generation to generation. We're not talking one generation, we're talking hundreds of generations, if not thousands of generations of these birds. So the idea is this. He saw all these different finches, and the idea was that if we look at finch A up at the top here, had a really big beak. And that beak allowed that bird to crack open seeds and eat seeds. So that bird was a finch. You see their feathers look identical. That bird ate seeds. How did it develop that trait? Well, it just, it had a big beak. One day a bird had a big beak, was born with a bigger beak, and then, it ate a bunch of seeds and said, oh, this is a good food source. The one on the bottom has a smaller beak and would maybe eat things like maybe smaller seeds or maybe insects or something like that. There are many, many different types of finches. Let's look at a chart here. So these are all the finches on the Galapagos Islands. They basically all have a common ancestor, and over many generations, they've developed different beak shapes and different colors and things like that to kind of live within a different niche in its environment. And this is called adaptive radiation. So you can see here that all of these ones with kind of these pointy beaks, these all eat insects, so all along the top here. And then we move down, these kind of wider beaked birds, they eat seeds because they can crack open the seeds with those bigger beaks. And then you have it's kind of more of a specialized beak here on this one. It's really skinny and long, so it can get into those cactus seeds. This one here has a different shaped beak again, and it eats bugs and fruit. So all of these birds adapted to eat different things so they wouldn't be competing with one another. So there was a basic need within the population to kind of diversify what they were eating. Over many generations, different birds were born with different beak shapes, and those traits allowed them to eat different foods, and then because they were eating different foods, they passed on those traits to their offspring, and you get the traits continuing to exist. If you could imagine a bird was born with like a completely flat beak, it wasn't pointy at all, just kind of flat. Well, what would happen to that bird? It would have difficulty finding food. It would then, maybe be weak, wouldn't be able to find a mate, and it would die. So that genetic trait would die with that bird. So natural selection kind of goes two ways. Favorable traits get passed on. Unfavorable traits will actually disappear from the population, so they'll actually die off because of their unfavorable traits. So that's kind of natural selection and adaptive radiation, which goes along with natural selection in a nutshell. Does anybody have any questions with that? Any questions about adaptive radiation, natural selection, like that? Taylor, I have not read the book, The Perfect People, although it sounds interesting. There's some cool movies out, I shouldn't say out, but they've been out for a long time. That deal with genetic sort of engineering and traits. There's one called The Island. It's actually out on Netflix right now with Ewan McGregor and Scarlett Johansson, I think. Really cool book, or really cool movie. And the other one, I can't think of it. Well, it'll come to me later. Niche. Yes, Taylor, niche. Niche is kind of, it's not a super concrete idea. It's where an organism fits into its environment. So if we look at these finches, each sort of finch fits a different niche. What do I mean by that? Well, some of the finches will eat seeds. That's its niche. It eats seeds, it passes the seeds around the environment, the plants grow because it ate the seed. There you go. Some will eat bugs. That's the niche of that bird. It eats bugs. That's the environment in which it lives, and it eats bugs. And some of them eat insects. That's its niche. Instead of eating a bug, maybe it eats a seed or a fruit. So just how an organism fits into its environment is a niche. What is my niche? That's a good question. My niche is, my environment. So what do? I live in my house. I maintain my yard. I go to the grocery store and buy food. I come to work. I, broadcast out to you guys. That's my niche. I provide education. I consume goods. I maintain a yard. It's kind of my environment. That's where I live. That's kind of my life. So I don't know if that's a good example or not. Okay, kind of going a little bit unrelated, but kind of related. We need to talk about succession. So primary succession, primary is kind of first, and then succession means the first sort of thing to, kind of evolve or kind of move into an area. So when we talk about ecological succession, we're talking about changes in the environment. So biotic characteristics in an area over time. We're talking about living things, so we're talking specific to living things. So over time, life in an area will change. And we'll look at some examples. We're going to talk about primary and secondary succession. So this sort of map or picture, you kind of read from left to right. And we start over here at completely bare rock. Can anyone think of an environment, someplace, not like a really specific location, like down the street from my house, there's a rock pointing out of the ground. No. Can anyone think of an environment where there would be a lot of bare rock? Anyone? Why would there be bare rock anywhere? Where would environments exist where there was no plant life at all? Try not to think of like really high elevations because those aren't great examples, but the Grand Canyon, the mountain. So the Grand Canyon's kind of in a desert, most of it, so that's probably why there's not a ton of life there. But you are kind of right. You have this weathering occurring where rock is getting exposed. Kelowna a long time ago. How long ago, Abby? Any ideas? A rocky beach. A desert. So we're kind of there. Deserts have dirt, they have soil, they have cactus. So I don't want to kind of link succession with deserts because that's not a good fit. But the idea here is on the Grand Canyon, beaches. These are all good examples because rocks are kind of getting exposed through weathering. That's kind of what I'm trying to get at. Abby's coming up with how long ago Kelowna area would have been completely covered in rock. So the Okanagan Valley is a geologically carved out. So if you've ever driven from Kelowna to Vancouver, or if you've flown above Kelowna, you have a big plateau. Kind of once you drive up the connector, you get to the Pennask summit. Once you get up to the top of out of the valley, it's just flat. There's not really a lot going on. We don't have a lot of mountains around us, but we do live in a valley. So the reason our valley exists, the reason the lake's there is because about 10 to 15,000 years ago, so longer than Abby was thinking, there was a huge glacier on top of us. So we would have been under about 1 kilometer or 2 of ice. And that glacier kind of flowed down and it scraped out the Okanagan Valley. When the glacier melted, it left water in the low-lying areas, and you end up with Okanagan Lake. So I'm going to jump forward in my presentation and then jump back and see if we can kind of get the idea better. Has anyone seen this before? I bet somebody in class has seen this. This is a glacier. This is the Illecillewaet Glacier. Does anybody know where this is? I have a pretty strong feeling that at least 1 or 2 of us have seen this before. And once I tell you where it is, you might think, oh yeah, I've seen that for sure. It's not in Nunavut. It's not in the Kootenays. Well, I guess it kind of is the North Kootenays. The Illecillewaet Glacier is in Glacier National Park. So if you've ever driven, we'll say from Kelowna to Calgary along Highway 1, this is just past Revelstoke, and it's just before Rogers Pass. So you kind of leave Revelstoke and you start climbing the mountains, and then you do this big turn, you get to Rogers Pass, and then you turn, the road turns right and goes towards Golden. And if you look back behind you, you can see this glacier. It's called the Illecillewaet Glacier. Columbia Icefields is, I'm pretty sure it's a kind of different location, but icefields and glaciers are closely related, and that kind of gets the idea which I want to talk. So if we just look at this picture, you can see this glacier. It's receding. It used to extend much further, but what's underneath the glacier? All of this land here is just completely bare rock. And then if you go a little bit further over, you start to see a little bit of green happening here, but really there's not a ton of trees in this area. And the reason for that is once glaciers retreated after the last ice age, it left just bare rock everywhere. So there was no soil for any plants to grow. So I'll jump back. So if you can imagine a glacier retreats, that's kind of like the Okanagan Valley. You guys were talking about weathering as a result of rivers, but thinking on a bigger scale, you end up with completely bare rock. Well, nothing can grow in just rock. You need soil, you need nutrients. We know this. Plants can't get nutrients out of rock. Some can. You need the nitrification to happen to get that soil, to get the nitrogen, carbon from the atmosphere. You need that phosphorus. So what happens is you have something called pioneer species. These are lichens and moss. They grow on rocks. You've likely seen them before. It's that kind of furry-ish stuff that grows on rocks. And these lichens will break the rock down. They're called a pioneer species because they're the first species to enter an ecosystem. They break rock down and they die. They take nutrients right out of the rock, which is kind of cool. They die, and then they break down and decompose, and then you get a little bit of soil. So now there's a little bit of soil, and maybe like a seed blows in, lands, or a bird brings it in, and maybe a little plant grows. There's not a lot of soil, but that plant's growing. It's taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and then that plant dies. And then it decomposes, and now you have a little bit more soil. And you can see the amount of soil getting created here gets deeper and deeper as you get more and more trees. So you get into the small annual plants, then you get into kind of a grassland sort of area. And then as these plants grow and die, you get more soil, grow and die, more soil, grow and die. The bigger the plant, the more stuff that's gonna die, the more soil you get. So you get these pioneer species that enter an environment, they die, they create soil. And then as you go along, you end up with at the very end here, it's a climax community, also called a mature community, things like that. So the idea behind primary succession is an area where there is no soil. There's nothing. It's just bare rock. That's all that's there. So generally happens after a glacier is retreated. Would have happened in the Okanagan Valley about 10,000 years ago when the glaciers melted. Would have just been bare rock. What happens? Well, you get weathering, bring soil in, lichens, moss move in, create some soil. Animals start to move in, and there you go. That's a lot of years from now, Alex, and I'm thinking that the Earth won't be here then, but there already is soil in the Grand Canyon. There's plants that grow there. It's definitely not primary succession. It's just a desert. That's why there's not a huge variety of trees. So I would say the Grand Canyon's like the Grand Canyon as a result of mainly it being a desert, not receiving much rainfall, not really related as much to primary succession. So detach those ideas in your head because they're slightly unrelated, but you're kind of on the right track. You have bare rock exposed, then you can end up with succession. The Illecillewaet Glacier, will it become a mature environment? The Illecillewaet Glacier is over 2,000 meters, so once you get above 2,000 meters, the atmosphere is really thin, and you don't get a lot of big trees growing. So you end up with these other factors that influence it. If the glacier retreats at a lower level, maybe the bottom of the glacier, there'll be a forest there. If you've driven through that area, there's forest all around. And then where the glacier went, there's no forest, obviously, because it's starting to retreat. So there are mature communities really close to the glacier, and eventually they'll kind of fill in the areas where the glacier once existed, kind of the low-lying areas of the valley that it's created. So yeah, for sure, it'll eventually turn into a mature community, just not above sort of 2,000 meters because there's very little atmosphere up there. Not much can grow. Okay, so back to the notes. You guys can fill all this stuff in, but so wind carries lichens and mosses into an environment. They have a symbiotic relationship with rock. They break it down, the rock. They take nutrients right out of rock, which is kind of cool, instead of having to grow in soil. And then they weather the rock, and then you get the soil. Once the soil's there, animals start to move in, more plants start to grow, and then you get this succession until you get to a mature community. And it can take hundreds of years. It's not like it's a quick thing. It takes a long time. So back to the Illecillewaet Glacier, Glacier National Park, just outside of Revelstoke. You get this retreating glacier. It starts melting. You're left with bare rock. You can see some greenish grasses growing on the side, and kind of behind me where the glacier really hasn't been. The glacier is only in this kind of low-lying area. So this is primary succession happening right here. And eventually there'll be enough soil where, animals will come in, trees can grow, things like that. A second example that is one that students often get confused about is this behind me. So these are both pictures from Hawaii. The idea behind primary succession is you have bare exposed rock. There's no soil. Well, what happens when you have lava? Like the picture on the right here is, you can see that there's some plants growing. This lava field kind of took over an area where there was soil, was plants growing. So is this primary succession, or is this maybe secondary succession? Does nature have to start from scratch, or is it already growing? Yeah, the one on the left here is definitely still flowing. On the right, it's kind of solid and hardened. So the big two for primary succession are retreating glaciers will leave bare rock exposed, and when you have a volcanic eruption. If you can imagine this lava flow covering a mature forest, maybe there was hundreds of feet of soil. Now it's completely covered and sealed off, and new rock has been formed on top. So is it primary succession? For sure it is. There isn't any soil there. That community, even though it could be trapped below, needs to start from scratch again. You have weathering occurring, you have lichens and moss moving in. So lava is sort of the second reason why we can end up with primary succession. Second thing we need to talk about is secondary succession. So secondary succession isn't primary, it's secondary. It's the second sort of thing. And this happens after major disturbances. So we can talk about lots of different things. Fires is a big one, especially for where we live. You can have things like flooding and all sorts of other stuff happening. But the idea here is that if a fire goes through an area, Kelowna is a great example. We talk about the Okanagan Mountain Park fire. That big hillside, the south end of Kelowna, the hillside, if you go up there, if you look up there, there's lots of plants growing. There's lots of stuff happening up there. Lots of animals still live there. Why? Well, the soil never disappeared. The fire came through, it burnt down all the trees, burnt down all the grass, but it left soil. So seeds were in the soil, they grow, there's soil to grow things in. So this is what secondary succession is. An area that already had established soil, has some sort of natural disaster. And then once that disaster is done, the forest can regrow or the plants can regrow because there's soil there already. So this can happen really quickly. Primary succession takes hundreds of years, where secondary succession can happen within 100 years. So this is a much faster process. So if we can compare the two different processes, the important idea here is that secondary succession down at the bottom, all the soil is established. You can see there's this dark brown layer all along, whereas up here at primary succession, you don't have that soil. You just have bare exposed rock. Then you have to add that rock to break down, soil starts, trees start. So this is over hundreds of years, and then this is over, like 5 to 150 years. So it's much shorter term for secondary succession. The last idea is mature communities. Now, mature communities kind of implies unchanging, but it isn't sort of necessarily true. Mature communities are constantly changing. Trees get old, they die, they fall down, but they happen slowly. Like trees take hundreds of years to grow, then they die and fall down and then decompose and more trees are there. So a mature community still changes, but not quickly. Yeah, that's a good point, Abby. We get secondary succession in Kelowna every time we have summer fires. And now that we have things like pine beetle and drier summers, it's going to happen much more frequently in our area. I know from my house I can kind of see the lake and a little bit of the valley around. And actually, my house, I didn't own it at the time, but when the fire went through, because I live up on the south end of Kelowna, the house that I was in before I owned it burnt down, and then they rebuilt it, and then I bought it. But all that hillside is all starting to grow again. And then if I look across the lake, I can see up towards kind of Glen Rose area. There's been a couple fires up there, you know, all over the place. So this is all secondary succession happening. All of these mature communities, these mature forests, they burn down. All the trees are just like matchsticks standing there. They fall down in the wind, and then they decompose and more plants will grow. There's tons of sunlight, happens really quickly, and then you end up with a mature community happening again. So in about 100 years, hopefully you guys will still be around. You look at the south slopes of Kelowna, if it's not covered in houses, there'll probably be a big forest there. Okay, so some other things that can affect ecosystems are flooding. And this is kind of another thing that can lead to secondary succession happening. If you have an area that's full of trees and grasses and plants, and then a big flood comes through and wipes out all the plants, well, you're left with soil still, so plants can regrow. But you don't end up with bare rock exposed, generally speaking. So when water's not contained, it spills its banks, you get flooding. Human towns and cities, flooding happens, and it can cause the spread of sewage, because sewage pipes usually run under the ground because we use gravity. It rises to the surface, and then people come in contact with that, and it can spread disease and things like that. Climate change is causing more flooding as ocean levels rise, so we'll look at a little bit of that here in a second. And then we talk a little bit about tsunamis occurring. And if you get a big enough earthquake happening, a tsunami can wipe an area out, which is just a big wave of water. So we'll look at a video of that here in a second. So that's flooding. This is a picture of Kelowna, Mission Creek, from space. You can see 1938 up at the top. You can see Mission Creek kind of running, and there's this kind of other meandering path of the creek, and it kind of runs down towards Okanagan Lake here. And then this is 2009 at the bottom, obviously. The creek doesn't meander anymore. It's just a straight thing. If you ever walk down the Mission Greenway, they've built these huge banks on either side of Mission Creek, which contains the river, or the creek. If it gets really high in the spring, when the winter melt occurs and runoff starts to happen, it gets really high, it won't flood its banks and spill into the houses and things around the creek. So if you really think of why Kelowna is here, if you think of the geography around the Kelowna area, you have this really steep valley, but Kelowna is this really flat area. That's why the city exists where it does, because it's nice and flat. Like West Kelowna is kind of built on a mountain hillside area. There's not a lot of flat area in West Kelowna, but Kelowna, nice and flat. Why is Kelowna so flat? Why does Kelowna kind of extend out into the middle of Okanagan Lake? Okanagan Lake kind of runs straight, and then it takes a little turn at Kelowna, and then it goes back down. Why is Kelowna where it is? What caused Kelowna to exist where it is? Any ideas? The map here should give you a hint. Kelowna's here because we're on a big floodplain. So all of the rivers that kind of run down, Mission Creek being a big one, has taken all of this rock from up in the hillside and it's broken it down to sand and spread it all over this nice big flat floodplain where we all live, most of us live. So this happened over really long periods of time, thousands and thousands of years. So why is Kelowna such a fertile area to grow things? Well, all of the orchards that kind of exist down in this area, used to just get flooded every spring. Mission Creek would flood its banks. All of this flooding would put all this deposits of silt and everything over the fields, and then you'd be able to grow things. Rivers are great at transporting nutrients. We talk about the nutrient cycles. Well, how do the nutrients get into the fields before we had fertilizers? Flooding. That was how this area became so fertile. I mean, we have lots of sun in the summer, but the soil was fertile because of flooding. Now, here we are, 1938, so we're talking about 60 years later. We've blocked the banks of Mission Creek. We don't need the flooding anymore. We try to avoid it because there's houses there. So this is happening right now as we speak. This is Mission Creek. This is Gordon Drive. This is the Mission Sports Fields. H2O Center is kind of right above my head here. What they're doing is the city has purchased all of this land in the red area, and they're going to return this one section of Mission Creek back to its original meandering path, this white line. So if you've been to the Greenway recently, this area is blocked off. You can't walk up this side of the river because they're restoring its kind of original path. They're allowing it to kind of have a bit of a floodplain. And these floodplains are good because they, in the spring when everything melts, it is able to absorb lots of water and it doesn't flood as readily. So this is happening right now. As we speak. Pretty cool. They're fixing up Mission Creek, allowing it to kind of return to somewhat of an original path instead of just being the straight run through that it is now. So to prevent flooding. The other one that I like talking about is the tsunami that happened to Japan a few years ago because it was devastating. I want to kind of lead with that. Almost 10,000 people died in the tsunami and earthquake that happened. So I don't want to, make jokes of anything out of respect, but some of the footage you watch kind of just makes you sit there in awe and say how could that have happened? So a little bit about the earthquake. You can see down here was a 9.0, which was one of the strongest we've ever recorded on Earth. And the tsunami that it created traveled 2.5 miles a second, so that's pretty fast. And the northern half of Japan actually moved 8 feet closer to North America. So when the earthquake happened, everything kind of shifted 8 feet closer to North America, which is incredible. We talk about continents moving at about a centimeter a year, and all of a sudden this whole continent moved, well, not a continent, but the islands of Japan moved 8 feet in a matter of seconds. I think this is fascinating too, because of how the Earth kind of redistributed its mass. The day or the Earth's rotation now is 1.8 microseconds shorter. So the actual day is shorter because of this earthquake, which is just kind of blows your mind. So talking a little bit about the tsunami that happened, at its highest, it was actually higher than 33 feet in some spots, but 33 feet. Imagine how tall your house is. Is your house 33 feet tall? Probably not. Might be close, depending on where you live, how big your house is. So this tsunami is traveling 500 miles an hour across the open ocean. When it gets to shore, it slows down a little bit, but literally destroyed some cities. So I'm going to put on a couple of videos here. The audio is not the kind of important part, but just watching kind of the devastation that happened is... Get this blown up. So this is a city on the coast of Japan. You can see this wall that is here. So they've planned for tsunamis in this city. They've built this giant wall. Just wait till the guy pans out a little bit. Jump ahead. So there's the harbor. And this is kind of the perfect storm, if you will, where you have this kind of V-shaped harbor with a tsunami coming in. Instead of it being spread out over lots of flat area, it kind of gets funneled up this valley. This wall here is, I don't know how tall, you could probably guess as well as I could. It's a better picture of it. So you can see people think of tsunami as being this giant, rolling wave of water that kind of crashes down on the beach. That's not what a tsunami is. It's kind of it starts really slowly, really gradually, but it 30 feet of water coming towards you. So it's quite strong. So you can see the start of it here. They have kind of break walls to prevent tsunamis coming in. So they've planned for this day. They know that they're in a seismically active area. You see the water start to flow in the port a little bit. So at first it doesn't really seem like much, and it isn't, because it happens quite slowly. And you can see that there's no huge wave coming. It's just a gradual increase of water. So this is going over the first break wall out here, and then it just keeps kind of rolling in. The video is a bit of a long one, but let's just jump ahead here. So you can see the wave kind of comes in. This wall, I don't know how tall you think that is, maybe like probably 25, 30 feet. This wall of water just kind of starts cruising right over top. It will in a second. This is the tsunami coming in. So it starts to flow right over the breakwater there for the tsunami. So this wall was built to stop tsunamis, but this tsunami was so big that it went right over the wall. Doesn't happen super fast. They had a few minutes of warning, so they knew it was coming. But you can see it's just this massive increase of water. You look out into the port again, all these boats have been flipped over, and basically this whole community was just kind of wiped out in a matter of minutes. I'll just jump ahead here a little bit further. You can see the wall is completely covered now. You'd run. Well, higher ground is a good idea. Again, it's not this super big kind of tidal wave that everyone thinks of. You can see it's just filled up this whole bay. And this area was kind of lucky because it was in a sort of a mountainous area where people could just go to higher ground really quickly. But the next video I'll show you here, some people weren't quite as lucky. So I'll get him to go back to the port here. So you can see that this big wall, you can just see the top of it now, and everything behind it's completely flooded. There's not any difference between the height of the water. So it was basically 30 foot of water just came in, and then it stayed there for a while, and then it slowly will wash its way out. You can see another wave coming in, this white out here again. So it comes in a couple sets of waves and kind of floods an area. So this is kind of an extreme example where the second wall of water is now coming in and flooding the area. So this was, a port sort of setting with steep walls on either side. So that was a kind of an interesting example. The next one is a river valley. It's kind of, think of like Vancouver. I guess we get to watch the ad first. Hopefully you had your McDonald's breakfast. I think we should get McDonald's to sponsor us maybe, and then we could, charge them, or they could bring me McNuggets to teach, something like that. All right, so this is kind of a flat area. If this were to be an area, this would be kind of like Vancouver, sort of, I don't know, Delta or Richmond. Well, why don't you guys bring me McDonald's? So you can see this white line here at the bottom. This is a wave of the tsunami coming through. And it's kind of a low-lying flat area. So you ask, how did 10,000 people die? Well, here comes a wall 30-foot-ish of water. And these are houses. So these aren't like, you can see cars floating around in here and stuff. And it's just 30 feet of water washing up a really flat area. So this is how a tsunami kills people, because it's not necessarily the water that's going to drown you. People can swim in water, but when you fill water with cars and you fill water with houses and debris, as soon as you get kind of taken under, you have no chance of coming up, sort of thing. So you can see on the left here is the river running down this way on the left side, but this is like an overpass of a highway here where the wall of water just kind of comes up to it. I think there's some truckers you can see here. Yeah, just stopped on the overpass. And you can see him standing on the bed of his truck, just at the highest point around. And it's pretty incredible to think that, this could happen. In your guys' lifetime, I think this has happened twice. In 2004, there was the tsunami that killed 200,000 people. There was an earthquake in Indonesia, and it went through all the way over to India, tsunami and stuff like that. So you can just see the devastation that happened. So this was not long ago. There's a lot of kind of footage of this. That's why I show it. But you can see things like boats, and then you think, oh, a tsunami is a wall of water. And then you end up with this fires happening in the water. You see a boat now is a couple of kilometers inland. And people just fleeing. You can see some of the fires burning on the rubble, kind of being washed inland. So, pretty scary stuff. Just run away. People say, well, this wall of water is traveling faster than you can run. So there's no running away. You just need to hope that there's somewhere high for you to, escape to, sort of thing. So, and this isn't like right at the beach. This is kilometers inland. When you imagine like a propane tank or something near a house, it gets washed off its foundation, it explodes, all this debris is floating, and then it's now on fire, sort of thing. So this is a person running away, but they don't say whether the person made it or not. But I don't think you could run that fast for that long. This is another town, and this one, you can see this building here in the foreground is just going to basically disappear. There's another port city, and this 30-foot wall of water just comes along and just kind of goes right through everything. So in probably next week, we'll start talking about earthquakes a little bit, and we'll talk about how these tsunamis can happen in the first place. Surprisingly, out in the middle of the ocean, there isn't this huge wave, so boats that were in port were trying to escape out into the ocean because once you make it out there, there's no real high cresting waves. The waves crest on the shoreline. This is the Sendai airport, which was close to the coast, and people were standing on the roof. Another port city. 30-foot wall of water cruising through, and then just people going to highest ground that they could find. Pretty crazy. Cars just bouncing around, shipping containers, everything. Devastated. So that's kind of what a tsunami does, the kind of devastating impacts that they can have. And we talk about some other natural disasters that are occurring. Drought is another big one. And basically, an area can be dry, like Kelowna is dry. But as long as we get a lot of snow in the winter, refills all of the lakes around us where we get our water from, we're okay. And this winter will be a good example because we have lots of snow in the mountains. It'll run off into the lakes. The lakes are all of our reservoirs, and it'll store all that water. And then we end up with no drought in the summer, even though it gets really dry. So drought occurs over many years. It's not just like it was a dry summer, we have a drought. Well, not really. If it's dry for like 5-10 years, that's a drought. I'm glad you brought that up, Anna. We're going to talk about California here in a second. And Abby, yeah, if a tsunami's coming, if you have a boat and you can get out to the open ocean, that's a good place to be for sure. Or climbing a mountain. I went to Thailand the year after the 2004 tsunami that killed many people. I was on a small island, and this island's kind of shaped like a saddle. There's 2 mountains and then kind of like a beach down in the middle. And I was talking to a guy who's just had a restaurant there, and he got trapped up to his waist in mud. And he was in this mud for 12 hours until people could come save him and dig him out. He couldn't dig himself out because the mud was too thick. So lots of people died. Almost 200,000 people died in that tsunami. It's pretty incredible. So climate change and droughts. Here we go. January 13th, 2013. So this is 1 year, and this is the next year on the same day. This is the coast of California. You can see the kind of border California. This is Nevada right here. So you should have all of this snow, but it isn't there, 2014. Here we are 2 years later, and California still hasn't received the snow in the winter yet. So this is what causes drought. Prolonged time without snow in the winter. You don't have runoff, the reservoirs don't fill up. This is the same lake in California, a year apart. So on the left you have all these boats and a marina up here at the top, and then now you have this all drained out and nothing left. Lake Oroville, September 5th, 2014, so 3 years apart. You can see that the lake level has dropped considerably. It's not a matter of just getting water, it's how does it get there? Where does it come from? Like, how would you manage to move a large enough amount of water to feed all these people and things like that? Same lake, Lake Oroville in California, you can see. Taken from the ocean. Yeah, it has salt in it though, so people can't drink it. You can't put it on land. It'll kill all the plants. It's not much of a lake anymore. So that's another big one, and these huge impacts for us because a lot of the food we eat comes from California. It's grown there. The last sort of natural cause we'll talk about is insect infestation. This plays huge impact, especially for BC because we're such a commodities-based income. So we end up with pine beetle. I'm not even going to make you guess, but we have huge areas of BC that are affected by pine beetle. And it's really important because it kills all these forests. It kills the trees faster than we can harvest them, which is a huge problem. So basically, the pine beetle has a symbiotic relationship, a mutualistic relationship, no, a commensalistic relationship with a fungus. So this fungus lives with the pine beetle and it stains the wood. So pine beetle infested wood turns this blue color. And at first we were like, oh no, the wood's blue, we can't use this for anything. And then some smart people were like, heck yeah, we can use this for something. This is beautiful stained kind of bluish wood. So people started making hardwood floors out of it and all sorts of other sort of decorative sort of wood things because of this blue stain in the wood. But basically, the pine beetle used to get killed off every winter when it got cold. But now that it's not cold anymore in the winter in BC because of climate change, the pine beetle kind of just grew out of control and killed all the forest. And essentially, if a pine beetle can get there, it'll kill the tree and move on. So it's essentially a parasite to the tree. It kills it, and we end up with huge swaths of forest that are essentially just dead. And then we have forest fires that just wipe out these areas and lots of bad things happening. So pine beetle is just one example. Killing every last pine beetle. Yeah, it would be a great thing if we could. Unfortunately, we can't. So this is areas that have been affected by pine beetle. 1999. You could see it kind of had entered the interior of BC a little bit. Northern BC is covered in forest, but it gets cold enough up here still to kill the pine beetle each winter. You need minus, I forget what the dates are, you need minus 20 or colder for more than 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something like that to kill it. If you get minus 20 for a couple days, they won't die. You need it over long periods of time. So as the temperature increases, the pine beetle can spread. Is it still a big deal? Yeah, I mean, this red here, this is forest that's essentially dead. And there's so many people that earn their livelihood from cutting down trees, making pulp, paper, lumber, and they can't do that anymore because all these trees are dead. and then the forest fire danger kind of increases as it's drier as well. You get a lightning strike, and all this red area is kind of just dead forest. So it just burns, which isn't good because that releases more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And we get this kind of runaway cycle where now we have more greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. It gets warmer still. Kind of scary. So yeah, it's still a huge issue. We're down here, obviously, and there's still some good forest around us, but in the interior of BC, like Quesnel all the way up to Prince George, it's devastating up there. And a lot of our economy is exporting lumber to different countries, China and the United States and all sorts of other places. So it's a huge, huge impact. How long do I think it will take for the world to end? Just that. You're just going to go right there, hey? How long do I think for the world to end? I forget I think in 1 billion years, the sun is going to turn into a red giant, which will consume Earth. So we got 1 billion or so years. 5 billion? Well, that's a long time from now. So for sure 1 billion years, unless something happens, asteroid impact, some other scary thing. So this is a picture of pine beetle. They're about the size of a grain of rice, so they're not huge. And they just eat through the outer edge of the tree. And you can see this is that blue stain I was talking about where this fungus grows. And you end up with this kind of bluish wood. So that's pine beetle. Yeah, 1 billion years from now, it'll get warmer and warmer and warmer until we all cook. And then the sun will consume Earth eventually. No big deal. So the important ideas. I don't like this section because it's just a random smattering of things together, but natural selection. You have some sort of genetic mutation that gets passed on to offspring over many generations that helps an organism survive or kills it off. There you go. That was the first big idea. Adaptations, we talked about adaptive radiation. Pardon me, as a result of natural selection. Primary succession, where you have bare rock exposed, you get soil created, plants grow, create more soil. You have pioneer species, the first ones to enter an area. Secondary succession happens after some sort of disaster. So you have fire, flood, drought. All the soil's still there, but conditions sort of improve. So you end up with pioneer species again, much shorter time frame. Mature community. Other things that can affect ecosystems would be flooding. Talked about tsunami is another big one. Watched a couple videos. Drought, and then insect infestations like pine beetle. So those are kind of the big ideas, kind of pieced together. And there you go. So it's about 10:15-ish. I would like to take a break, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes, let's say. So we'll come back at 10:30. And I want to do the next section. It's just a short one, so it won't take too long. But we do need to take a bit of a break because I need to go see if I can get rid of my cough and grab some water. I'll just read through chat here. Would be good to use the pine trees with the pine beetles and not waste good pine. That's really true. We could use it, but there's just too much of it. It's all dead, and we just can't utilize it as fast as it dies. Eventually just falls over and starts to rot. And we just can't get to it fast enough. There's just so much. All of the forest. It's not bad where we live. You look onto the hillsides, you see a few pine trees killed here and there. You go to the interior of BC, up 100 Mile House, Quesnel, all the way up to Prince George, and the forests are just dead. It's just complete red pine trees, just dead. So you just can't get to them fast enough. And Alex, I'm going to tend to agree with you that we won't be here in 1 billion years. There'll be something that happens before then where we wipe ourselves out, I'm sure. Asteroid impact, us just being silly, climate change, whatever way you slice it, 1 billion years is a long time, and we won't be here. So nothing to worry about. You used to live in PG and it smells horrible. Yeah, those mills kind of make it smell a little bit. What are you going to do? All right, 10:15. I will see you guys back in 15 minutes. Grab some food, grab a snack. We're going to do section 3.2 after the break, and then we'll just keep rolling. So thanks, guys. We'll see you back in a few minutes. Hi guys, welcome back. If you can go ahead and give me some green check marks again, and we'll make sure everyone's with me still. Or not. Maybe you just left. There we go, perfect. Before we get into the next unit, I want to talk about the assignment we're going to do for Unit 3. Now, I know I just introduced the first assignment last day with the biography of a nutrient, which was 2 days ago, but I want to do at least one assignment per unit. And we didn't do anything for the first unit, just get you guys started. The last unit, Unit 1, we didn't have anything. So Unit 2, we did the biography, and Unit 3, we're going to do another assignment. Has a little bit to do with natural selection and things like that. So there's a few of you without green check marks. I'm going to assume you're just not back from your little break yet, or you just didn't hear me ask for a green check mark. I don't know. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for a second about the assignment, and then we're going to do this next section, 3.2, and then I'll leave you guys. So just so you know, there's 3 sections in Unit 3. The next time I see you guys will be on Tuesday next week, sorry. I won't see you tomorrow. And then, of course, not on Friday. So I won't see you again till Tuesday next week, and we'll do the last section of Unit 3, and then we'll finish off Unit 3 next week. So I know it kind of started really slow, and then we jumped into Unit 1, and then I was done, and now Unit 2 is done, and now we're on Unit 3 already, and it seems like, whoa, we're going really fast. But unfortunately, we kind of have to go at this pace in order to get through everything. So it's just kind of one of the realities of the material and not seeing you guys every day for like an hour and a half like at normal schools. So let's have a look at the assignment, and then we will get into the next section. So the assignment is in the course. I just unlocked it, so if you haven't refreshed your course page in a while, it won't show up. And it's called the Adapted Squirrel Project, which is pretty good. When I used to teach this in regular school, I loved doing this one. It was always a good one. So the idea is we're kind of basing it around natural selection. So I'll just read through it, and if you have any questions, you can just fire them into chat. So natural selection results when a population of organisms has a variety of characteristics, and over time, the ones best able to survive will reproduce and pass on their genetic traits. I guess I could make this a bit bigger so you guys can probably see it. So what I want you to do is this. I want you to pick a biome, and it can be any of the 8 we've talked about, doesn't matter. And I want you to create a squirrel that is highly adapted to that biome. So we could have a squirrel in the permanent ice, we could have a squirrel in a tropical rainforest, it doesn't matter. So the idea is you're kind of making it up. So you can assume the squirrel and others like it migrated into this biome over a long period of time through natural selection, became highly adapted to survive there. This adaptation resulted in obvious differences to its body and behavior. So this is what I want you guys to include. A drawing or digital image. Now, I'm not gonna take off marks for a drawing. Like, I'm not gonna say, this is the worst drawing I've ever seen. It's not a drawing project. Some of you guys really like to draw, which is awesome. And you don't always get to draw things in science. So if you're artistic, then cool. If not, you wanna MS Paint an image, or like take pictures and put them together to make this squirrel, I'm okay with that too. So whatever you want. You can just hand draw it with a pencil on a piece of paper. Maybe give it a splash of color. That would be great if you have some. And I would like that too, but I'm not going to say, oh, that picture is terrible. The idea is I'm interested in the adaptations you've chosen. So the squirrel must have a creative name and at least 4 adaptations that are different from the original squirrel that make it better able to survive, reproduce in the new biome. So an idea would be, okay, you're looking at like the permanent ice, and you can think of some animals that live there. They have, thick layers of fat, short legs, whatever. Just think of things that allow animals to live in the permanent ice. How is this squirrel going to have those adaptations. So, and you can be whatever you want it to be. I would just encourage you to use really unrealistic adaptations, but things that are not man-made. So if you want to make this squirrel live in the desert and it has venom like a rattlesnake, that would be awesome. Like big fangs and venom, that's an adaptation, a physiological adaptation that the animal has. Perfect. That's great. What else? In the desert, maybe the squirrel has like photosynthetic skin, so it can absorb energy, create energy right from the sun. Awesome. Make it up, that's fine. Don't give it like a robot arm or like a jetpack or something like that. So if you wanted to eat sand, awesome. If you think your squirrel has adapted the ability to break down sand into its component parts and absorb nutrients right from those, perfect, great adaptation. So that's kind of it. You can use the stencil. Yeah, you can do whatever you want. I just don't want you to find a picture of a really crazy squirrel and say, this is my squirrel. Draw it, stencil it, whatever. The idea is the drawing's probably the least important part of this assignment. So what do you need? You need a description of the squirrel and the trophic level. So is it a first trophic level, second, third, fourth, fifth? Is it a primary producer? Is it a primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer, quaternary consumer? At least 3 food sources. So what does it eat? Does it eat sand? Does it eat ice? Maybe it eats lichen. Whatever. List any predators of the squirrel if it's like a bottom trophic level, like a primary producer or primary consumer, first or second trophic level. Any predators, if there are any. Description of its habitat. Where does it live? Where does it find food? Where does it sleep? Does it hibernate? Is it nocturnal? Is it diurnal? Description of the 4 adaptations and why the adaptation gives it an advantage. And you need to convince me, I'm the reader, you need to convince me that this squirrel could actually be a thing and that it has this advantage in the biome that it's in. So here's an example. This little squirrel here. You guys are probably familiar with this squirrel. The large sharp beak allows the squirrel to capture fish in the Arctic tundra biome. And this is one of its food sources. There you go. What an awesome squirrel with an eagle head. So that would be 1 adaptation. You have to include 4. They could be physiological adaptations, that's fine. Like, it's able to stay warm because it produces some chemical in its body, or I don't know. You can come up with whatever you want. You need to give it a name, and it's be a good name. And it can be the Terminator squirrel if you want it to be. If that's the name you're gonna go for, just avoid man-made objects and things like that. What do we got here? Are we allowed to go super unrealistic? Like squirrel is a super buff top-level predator with super long legs for running fast and camouflage fur with razor-sharp fangs and massive claws. That would be an amazing squirrel. As long as you can justify how each of those adaptations allows it to survive in its biome. And remember, adaptations don't need to be kind of linked to food. They can be different things. It can be a behavioral adaptation. It could be something the squirrel does to find a mate, to better reproduce and promote its genes and its offspring. It can have a body of a bear, the head of a squirrel, sure. A giant bear squirrel? That would be amazing. Sharp claws, big teeth. How are those adaptations going to help it survive? The big body, maybe it hibernates, maybe it doesn't. The idea is you can pick any of the 8 biomes. It doesn't matter which one. And you just need to justify how it can live in that environment. And Alex, it sounds silly, but it's a good example. It can have amazing dance moves. Maybe it can sing, and its song attracts a mate. As long as the adaptation helps it survive, helps it reproduce, then you can justify it. So, you can take this anywhere, and I love it. Yeah, it can have wings. A flying squirrel? Those already exist, but like flappy wing squirrel? Amazing. you're supposed to start with a squirrel, yes, and then it's supposed to evolve somehow. So it can be a squirrel with bear-like body. I'm not gonna criticize you as long as you can justify your adaptations within the biome that you've chosen. That's good. So that's the assignment. The drawing image, I mean, if you've made a go at it, I'll give you 10 out of 10. I'm not gonna criticize your drawing. I'm not an art teacher. This isn't an art class. So you can you make a go of it, and I'll give you the marks there. What I'm more concerned about is the written portion, the habitat, the description of the adaptation. So the bottom three here in this rubric are kind of the important ones I'm hoping for. So have you described your adaptations? Have you described the habitat in which it lives? And did you describe the trophic level? Is it first trophic level, primary producer? Second trophic level, primary consumer? Maybe it's third, fourth, fifth. Where does it fall in? So that's the assignment. And if you do have any questions along the way, then you can ask. But I just hope you guys have fun with it. When's this due? We'll have it due at the end of Unit 3 with the learning guide, just like we did with Unit 2. So I hope to finish Unit 3 on Tuesday next week, and then we'll wrap up Unit 3 by sort of mid next week, Thursday. So probably Thursday, Friday next week is when I'd like this in with the learning guide for Unit 3. Hopefully we can handle that. Any other questions before we go on to 3.2? So each unit is now going to be about a week long. Yeah, give or take. The units are, once we get into chemistry, which is Unit 4, I might jump, this is kind of confusing, I know. I might jump from Unit 3 to Unit 10, because we might do earth science next instead of the chemistry. And then we'll worry about the chemistry later, chemistry and physics to finish. So chemistry unit's really long, and we'll spend a couple weeks on each of those chapters, but the biology is kind of short-ish. A lot of kind of ideas that are kind of related because they're biology ideas, but like it's really hard to relate like natural selection and we talked about like ecosystems or the carbon cycle. Those things aren't really closely related, or biomes. I mean, they do have some common threads, but they're kind of separate ideas. When we get into chemistry, chemistry is kind of more like the math. We start with sort of a foundational concept and we kind of build on it until we get to the end. So I think I'm going to do Unit 10 next. So there we go. I'm going to 3.2, how humans influence ecosystems. So we talked about natural changes to ecosystems, things like fire, flood, drought, tsunami. These are human impacts on ecosystems. So I guess I like to describe the biology unit as being how we kind of wreck our environment, how we influence all of the different cycles and ecosystems and our sort of impact. And this is kind of taking that to, I don't know, kind of the climax of it, I suppose. So wetlands. Wetlands are really important for all sorts of reasons. Basically, it's just really waterlogged soil, and plants and animals can grow in it. You can have ponds and things like that. And basically, these wetlands are important because they're kind of like the kidneys of the earth. Our kidneys filter our blood. They take all the bad things out of our blood and then flush it out of our system. That's kind of what the wetlands do. They filter all the waterways. They can take all of the toxins and some of the toxins and all sorts of bad stuff out of the water systems that we use to survive, and then they kind of clean it up. So they prevent flooding, they provide habitat, they hold large amounts of water, so they kind of, in one respect, prevent floods from happening, but also prevents sort of soil, not soil, what am I trying to say? Prevent floods, and then when it's dry, they kind of prevent droughts because all that water is trapped in them and they constantly provide water. Did I say animals grow in the soil? Plants and animals grow in the soil? There you go. So this is a picture of the South Okanagan. You've probably maybe driven down to Oliver Suyus area. This is a picture of that area. Maybe seen this before. And why I bring it up is in the past 100 years, so we're not talking a super long time ago, but within 100 years, up to 85% of the wetlands in the South Okanagan have been destroyed. Same with the Fraser Valley. 70% of the Fraser Valley has been wiped out, all the wetlands. So looking at the picture, thinking about what the areas of South Okanagan and the Fraser Valley have in common, what happened to all the wetlands? Where did they go? Did they just dry up and disappear, or did something else happen to them? And you can get some ideas, possibly, from the picture. What happens in the Fraser Valley? What happens in the South Okanagan? They both share some very common things. I see Abby's typing, so I'll give you a second. Humans, what specifically happens in the Fraser Valley or specifically happens in the South Okanagan? What's happening in this picture? What are all these green rows in the bottom you see here? It definitely is human caused. We've wiped out all these wetlands. They didn't just vanish, disappear, and dry up. So what happened? See a couple of you typing, so I'll give you a second. Trying to control waterways, that's a huge part of it actually. We don't like the flooding because usually there's houses and things that get in the way. So we try to avoid that. The main thing here in this picture is agriculture. So we grow things like grapes to make wine. The South Okanagan, if you've ever driven down Highway 97, you go south through Penticton, you get down towards Oliver Suyus through OK Falls, it's just orchards, fruit trees, for as far as you can see on either side of the valley floor, and then you get the kind of valley walls like in the image here. So same thing in the Fraser Valley. We've taken these big fields and then we've covered them in either farmland for cows to graze or growing berries or things like that. Think about like Chilliwack, Abbotsford area of the lower mainland, South Fraser Valley, is just covered in plants. So instead of having these wetlands that absorb the water, prevent flooding, we've kind of wiped them out. So that's what's happened to our wetlands. Sustainability, again, this section's kind of just a bunch of ideas kind of thrown together, which I don't love it, but we'll go through it. Sustainability is a word you hear a lot. So when we talk about sustainability, the idea is there's sort of three things happening. You have sort of a respect for the natural environment, you have a respect for your community, and then there's a respect for economic vitality, meaning that you can have companies that can still exist. Like we don't just shut down all business. We need to have people working and things like that happening. So sustainability is trying to keep a ecosystem healthy while still allowing people to work and allowing things like farming and other stuff like that to happen. So people use an ecosystem to meet their needs without reducing the health of the ecosystem. That's kind of sustainability in a nutshell. And you hear the word thrown around a lot, and it's kind of, it can get political, and people can talk about it in terms of farming, and you talk about sustainable practices and things like that. And that is sustainability. Land use is exactly what it sounds like. It's how we use the land for urban development, agriculture, industry, mining, forestry. Resource use is using resources. So if you think for a second, it's kind of I always find it amazing. Think about everything around you. Clothes you're wearing, computer you're looking at, everything in front of me. I have TVs and lights and there's speakers and clock and curtains and everything. That all came from somewhere. Like, you don't just go to the field next to your house and pick out a camera and say, oh, this is the camera plant. No, that camera came from oil. All the plastic in the camera came from oil. Then we had all the metal parts had to be mined somewhere. The battery had to be mined. So if you look at just this one thing I'm staring at right now, the camera, the parts that make up that camera likely came from almost all over the world. Different regions are known for producing different resources. Canada's a really big country, so we have lots of resources. We have wood, we have mining, we have oil and gas. Our economy is based on these resources. We have a resource-based economy. If you go to another country, maybe pick just any country in Europe that's a little bit smaller, maybe like United Kingdom. Well, they don't have a ton of land. They're pretty densely packed in there. So they don't have forests to grow trees in. They don't have a lot of mines and things like that in the UK. There's not a lot of resources there. So they have to import their resources. And Canada exports them, other countries import them. So everything you use, the cotton in my shirt came from a field somewhere. The watch on my wrist, the plastic came from somewhere, the metal came from somewhere. It's just this kind of, all these resources that we use every day come from lots of different places. So just because we don't use them doesn't mean they don't get used, we just export them to different places. So one of the main resources, and this one's kind of taken a turn for the worse, or not the worse, the price of oil has gone down a lot. So there's a lower demand, and Alberta oil is really expensive. I was talking about Japan. Yeah, Japan is it's one of the most densely populated countries in the world. They don't have barely any resources in Japan, yet they manufacture cars, electronics. All of this stuff gets imported to Japan, gets assembled, then they export finished goods. So that's a great example, Abby. Alberta's oil sands, even northern BC has some oil production. They are the second largest proven oil reserve in the world is in Alberta. The largest is in Saudi Arabia. And our oil is a little bit different. We don't just put a pipe into the ground and suck oil out like they do in Saudi Arabia or the Middle East. What we have to do is we have to separate the oil and the sand that it's kind of mixed in. So I have a feeling that likely most of you have somebody you know that probably worked or works in oil and gas, whether in northern BC or Alberta. My brother-in-law works up there, or used to before the price of oil dropped. So we have this huge oil reserve there. And I don't want to talk about it for too long, but basically you take 2 tons of the stuff that the oil is mixed in, and that will produce, unfortunately, 1 barrel of oil. And then you can have 477 liters of water gives you 1 barrel of oil. So kind of staggering numbers, huge environmental impacts. And that's kind of what this whole section's about. So when we talk about resources and land use, we're talking about oil, we're talking about gas. There's a large uranium sort of mining industry in the Canadian Shield, like northern Ontario, northern Manitoba. There's lots of stuff happening all over Canada. So as we take these resources out of the ground, as we harvest trees, as we create mines, open pit, closed pit mines, we end up causing habitat loss. That's habitat where animals once lived. Now they can't live there anymore because we're in the way. We've cut out their trees and things like that. So we looked at that the picture a couple days ago of Haiti and Dominican Republic, the border. You have trees on one side, you have clear-cut logging on the other side. That's kind of the idea here. You end up losing habitat. So habitat loss is when you just kind of clear-cut a forest like on the left here, and then habitat fragmentation is where you have a big highway and it just kind of goes right through the middle of a forest. So the Okanagan Connector is a great example of this. You'd normally just have lush forest on either side, lots of lakes, stuff going on, and then you just put a big freeway between it and you're like, well, I don't want any deer to run out on that road because cars are going to hit the deer and that causes damage and people die, so I'm going to put big fences on either side of the road. So now you have this natural habitat where these animals live, and you've put a road through the middle of it, and you've put big fences so they can't get across to keep people safe, which makes sense, don't get me wrong. But those animals that live there used to roam through that area, and now they can't any longer. So the Okanagan Connector has these, and these are some other examples. Next time you drive to Vancouver or to Merritt or whatever, there's a couple bridges over top of the highway, and there's a couple tunnels under the highway, and there's no roads on the tunnels. There's nothing above it. It's just grass and ground. So what they've done is they've taken a fragmented habitat with a road going through it, and they have these animal overpasses. So the animals can move from one area to the next. And that's what these images are. These natural overpasses, and there's natural underpasses for animals to cross, so they don't have to cross the road, don't have to jump the fence. They can roam their natural habitat in search of food, shelter, whatever they're looking for, without getting hit by cars. They can get across. Pretty cool idea. Deforestation is another sort of thing that happens. So the image above me here is the rainforest in Brazil. And this happens in like thousands and thousands of places, this deforestation. The lumber that they're logging is really valuable, so there's that. Sometimes they cut down the trees for agricultural use, so they'll clear cut a forest in order to raise cattle because the demand for beef is so high. And basically it's exactly what you think it is. It's just cutting down forests. So this is an image from space over a period of about 10 years or so, showing how the rainforest kind of gets clear-cutted out of all those trees get cut down. There's actually some evidence to show that the deforestation in the rainforest is slowing down. There's countries, I wish I remembered the one, I think it was Norway, gave Brazil millions and millions of dollars to prevent deforestation. So there's countries around the world that are supporting the Brazilian government's efforts to stop deforestation, to stop the logging of the rainforest. So it is happening, it's slowing down, people are more aware of it, but it still exists. So there's lots of interesting stuff to be read about it. Obviously, you cut down a forest, you reduce biodiversity, but the biggest thing is once you've cut down all the trees and it rains, that soil that was on the ground, the soil that was there, that has all the nutrients in it that allows plants to survive, that soil gets washed away. Now those plants can't grow there anymore, and primary succession has to happen again. So that's the most devastating result of deforestation. Isn't the loss of the trees, isn't the loss of the biodiversity. It's as soon as it rains, the soil washes away, and then you don't have an area that can support plant life anymore, not to the extent at which it once did. So coming back to the ideas of primary and secondary succession, if you lose all your soil, you're back to primary succession, which can take hundreds, if not thousands of years to happen. Whereas if you can maintain that soil, you're looking at secondary succession, which happens in a much shorter time frame. Alex, this is a really interesting idea. There should be a law that says for every tree you cut, you have to plant another one. Countries have that. I think Thailand, if I'm not mistaken, has a rule. If you cut down one tree, you have to plant two. And it ensures that every tree you cut down, two more get planted. So if one dies, or it helps reforest. It's a great idea. It does happen. So there you go. Some other human impacts, we have agriculture is a big one. We have 7 billion people on the planet. We need to feed them all, so we need to grow lots of plants. If plants are left exposed during non-planting seasons, you can get wind erosion, soil erosion. Basically, the soil just blows away. There's no root structure to hold that dirt there. Then it just disappears. It gets blown away, and then you're looking at primary succession happening again, which isn't a good thing. When you use agricultural land for animals, so you raise some cattle, the cows walk on the land and they compact the soil. So instead of the soil being really thick and deep, you end up with really compacted soil, and plants can't grow in it as well. So there you go. It's another huge impact of harvesting animals and farming animals is the soil quality drops because they walk on it and they compact it down. Every panel that is bought, they get a company to plant a tree. There's lots of initiatives like that, Taylor, where companies will support replanting trees. And you know, when you're kids, I think they do a thing at schools in like grade 3 or 4 where you go to school and you get a tree and you go plant it. And yeah, there's lots of initiatives to plant trees. It's good. It provides habitats for animals and bugs, and it takes carbon out of the atmosphere. Trees there to harvest in a couple hundred years. There's lots of advantages to having trees. So we do things like aerate our grass. If you've ever been on a school field or something in the spring, there's all those little plugs of grass you've probably seen, and you like throw them at each other. I remember when I was a kid, I always used to do that one. That's it's called aeration. So they take this big rolling pin sort of thing with all these plugs, and it pulls all these little patches of grass out and allows water to enter the roots, allows air to get in there, so denitrification can happen, all that good stuff, all those nutrient cycles. We talked about it a few days ago. Does anybody recognize where this is? Resource use, human exploitation. We depend on resources for our livelihood, and we can, eliminate habitats. We can get soil degradation, contamination, water supplies. Anna's on it, yeah. This is Kelowna KLO School, so just on Gordon Drive, just past KLO Road. Kind of by KSS, but this is right next to KLO Middle School. And there was this stream that ran down between the school and the field, kind of beside it on Gordon Drive. And they completely covered the stream up with these concrete barriers, because you wouldn't want students falling in a stream and getting wet, because students just blindly walk through streams. I'm not sure why they covered it, but they did. It was really common practice a long time ago. But it's not really good for the ecology of an area. So this is called reclamation. So what you do is you take something that has been destroyed and you turn it back to how it once was. So what they've done and are currently doing, I think they're pretty much done or almost done. They've brought in a bunch of machines. They've taken out all these slabs of concrete. They've tried to return the stream here. You can see it's not a rushing torrent, but it's a small stream. They've tried to return it to how it once was, to a more natural path. They've added more natural things next to either side of the stream. And if we look at it from up above, you can see here is KLO School. Here's Gordon Drive. This is the big field next to it. And you can see the stream's now uncovered. They have a bridge over the stream. So I guess students can make it from one side to the other still without walking over that concrete. They've added a pond. They've added fish to the pond, the fish that naturally exist. I think they're like brook trout or something like that, as well as turtles that used to naturally inhabit the area. They've put them back in here to try to breed them and get them to establish in the area again. I'm just going to assume it's winter, Alex. You probably went above the field this time of year, fall, winter. Grass would probably be dead. So there you go. That's called reclamation, where you take an area that's used to just be a covered stream, but they've opened it up and they've got a bit of a wetland here, and they're going to start reintroducing species, create a new ecosystem next to the school. And when you think about it, how cool would that be to, as part of instead of having boring Mr. Borden sit here and talk about ecology and ecosystems, you just go out behind your school and say, okay, let's go look at an ecosystem. There's a pond here. We can see if we can find some fish or turtles, look at some birds, insects, how they're interacting. I think it's pretty amazing that they've decided to redo that. Last one here is over-exploitation. That's when you take a resource and you completely use it up. So, thank you for your support, Alex. The over-exploitation of resources. So it can result in extinction, and that's happened before many, many times. Does anyone know what this image is on the left here? This is a person standing here and another person down here. You know what that is? It's a somewhat famous image. I see nobody Bell can take a go at it. This is just around 1850 or 60. This picture was taken. It's they are skulls. Yeah, they're not bones, but skulls. Same idea. On the right, on my right over here, these are definitely elephant tusks. So I'll give you that one. No, it's not human skulls here. These are all bison skulls. You can kind of see some of the horns poking out here and there. So each one of these was the skull of a bison. You can see the guy up the top here has this big bison skull with the horns. So basically, when European settlers first came to North America, there was these herds of bison, like hundreds of thousands of them. And I don't know if you've talked about this in social studies yet. I think you probably will. Basically, what they do is they said there's just so many of these bison, and these bison were you use them for their fur and their meat and things like that. They said, how can we possibly wipe them all out? There's just so many. So they just started to kill them by the thousands, using just parts here and there and whatnot. And they literally wiped them out almost to extinction. They used to, First Nations would run them off cliffs, and then they would fall off the cliff and land at the bottom of the cliff and die, and then harvest the meat that way. Unfortunately, the European settlers weren't quite as useful with all of the things, and they just kind of killed them. Yeah, exactly. So there you go. Aboriginal people lost a very important food source. They did end up in this image grinding up all of these skeletons and make fertilizer out of them, but obviously it's overexploitation of resource. Right now, if you ever read the news, ivory is in huge demand. Elephant tusks here. There are people in reserves, you can see these fellas here, that literally will be assigned to a group of elephants, and their job is to follow those elephants around every day so poachers don't kill the elephants and harvest their tusks. So there's literally herds of elephants in Africa that have armed guards that are with them 24/7, so poachers won't kill them. And sometimes the armed guards get in firefights with poachers and like people die. It's bizarre. It's a crazy world. But ivory elephant tusks can, generate thousands of dollars. So if your family has absolutely nothing, you take down an elephant, you get these tusks, you can sell them and make a bunch of money. That's more money than your family would see in thousands or hundreds of years, sort of thing. So it does happen. Same thing with rhinoceros. I think there's only one or two of a certain species of rhino left because of cutting off their horns. Rhino horn is used in Chinese medicine and things like that. So they're actually about to burn this pile of ivory to prevent, these are all like captured ivory, and they're gonna burn it so nobody can sell it. And I know governments are aware of it in Africa now, so it is another thing that is important to protect biodiversity. Resource management, we talk about Aboriginal cultures. You guys talked about their loss of a food source in the bison. So here you go. We talk about Aboriginal knowledge. I mean, Aboriginal people lived in the environment that we live they lived there for thousands of years before Europeans came over. So they had all of these processes which they would do every year, which maintained soil quality and allowed them to live. So Cree people would burn the grass each spring, and all the ash would go into the soil and create really rich soil, fertile soil. So that was something they do every year. If you look at our fire suppression in BC, there's these huge impacts of fire beetle or mountain pine beetle forest fires. Why do they happen so much? All of this, the forest, the material on the forest floor has grown so deep that if a fire gets started, there's just so much fuel for it to burn through, and we end up with these huge fires. Whereas if we would allow natural fires to burn themselves, there would be less area to burn, and we'd end up with less wildfires or smaller wildfires as a result. So there's all these different ideas, and we talk about resource management, traditional ecological knowledge. There you go. Alex, why don't they just give the ivory to the people? Well, you can't just, who do you pick to give it to? somebody's just gonna end up selling it. So you burn it, take it out of the market. So there you go. That is section 3.2. So we're kind of midway through unit 3. I guess just about, or 2/3 of the way through unit 3. So we'll likely finish unit 3 next day. On Tuesday, I'll see you guys next. And then we will, go from there. I think I'm going to move on to earth science, and I haven't finished all the stuff I want to go through yet. So some of you are like, can I pick up the next learning guide? Unfortunately, I'm not done it yet because I don't love how the earth science is set up, so I'm adding some stuff. And so if you come this afternoon to the Spy Museum field trip, which is going to be pretty cool, you can pick up some stuff from me if you want, but or drop some off. But that's that. It's really important that you get done Unit 2 because we will be done Unit 3 next Tuesday. If you haven't done Unit 1, you're even further behind. Get that done. So there you go. That's kind of it. I won't see you guys till next Tuesday. So make sure you get Unit 2 done. I put a due date of Friday of this week on it. So if you could get everything handed in tomorrow, I'll get you your test password by Friday, and you can write the test over the weekend. And then on Tuesday, we'll see where everyone's at. Just like with the math stuff that we did last semester, you have to stay current with this because if you get behind, you will get left in the dust. So you got to stay current. You got to stay with the material as much as you can. I would say that the science is probably less work, a little bit easier. So it's really important that you try to stick with us. Once we finish the section in class, go do the practice right away while it's fresh in your mind and make your life a lot easier. So I'll leave you guys there. It's about 11:15. You guys have some time to work on this stuff. It'd be great if you could get it done. Unit 2 should be handed in, and I will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a great weekend, and hopefully we'll see you at school for the SPY field trip. It's going to be good. Thanks.